Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, hosted by the counselling team at RMIT University. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being.
Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 on the topic of adjusting to university. This time, Liz and I want to talk about life at university for students graduating from high school, coming from rural or interstate areas, and mature-age students returning to study. We hope to cover some common aspects of life when you first settle into university, even though it can be quite an exciting journey. So when Liz and I were thinking about this topic, we were thinking that people about to start uni might be wondering, what is university supposed to be like, Liz?
Yeah, and I think that's something we sort of just assume maybe people will know. But, in reality, it is a different structure to maybe what people have been used to. For those who've just completed year 12, for example, the structure of the day might look very different. We might have not a full day of classes from 9 until 3:30 kind of thing. There might be a morning class at 9 o'clock and then nothing till 4 in the afternoon, and there might be some days off. So it is a very different structure, and you might have an expectation about what university is going to be like, and the reality might not exactly match that. But I think it's just worth giving our listeners who might be about to start uni a little bit of an insight into what a typical sort of uni day might look like. And just bear in mind that it varies greatly from course to course, as in program to programs. We call them programs here at RMIT.
That's right.
So, it can vary, like some programs have very high contact hours and others have lower contact hours. What we mean by contact hours is class time. Basically, it will consist of lectures, tutorials, and sometimes labs if it's a medical kind of course. Lectures is where you basically will sit and listen to the content that's been delivered, that you're learning. Sometimes they'll provide you with PowerPoints that you can make notes on, but, you may wish to take notes on a laptop or on paper if you're a bit more old school. And then tutorials and labs will be a time to kind of apply that knowledge a little bit more. So tutorials are usually like smaller classes. Lectures, gosh, I remember when I started uni, I think one of my lectures had like 500 people in it. It was massive room.
Psychology 101.
Correct.
Lots of people enrolled in that program or in that subject.
Exactly.
And the lecture theatre would often be full.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's very daunting, I think, when you've been used to, a class of 25 or 30 at the most people in the room with you. Suddenly you've got this massive auditorium with heaps of people and you can feel a little bit anonymous. But then tutorials are probably a little bit more like what people are used to, the smaller sort of class sizes and a little bit more discussion. And labs, of course, are where you are going to be doing the sort of experimental work or, applying the concepts, looking in microscopes. And I'm not a medical person, so I can't tell you exactly, but
it is how you describe it, right? Applying the skills, using equipment. That's the whole point of those labs. So you do get to actually try things out, work things through, but also work in small groups, and probably shoots are the same.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And look, I think another thing that I was thinking about is that there'll be a change in where you sit in the pecking order, shall we say?
True. Yeah.
Like you've gone from year 7 up to year 12. You finally got to year 12. You're like the oldest students in the school, the most responsible. People look up to you.
That's
Maybe
right.
you're going to be like mentoring some of the younger ones. But this sense of, I've made it. I've reached the top. I've reached the final destination. And then you'll get to uni, and that won't be the case anymore. Having said that, though, there's really no hierarchy in uni. It's not like if you're in first year that a third year is like more authoritative or better or higher than you. And, in actual fact, because students don't always progress smoothly through their programs, things happen, life happens. Maybe you go reduced to part-time or, you have to repeat something. So you might actually have at any one time a mix of subjects across, first year, second year, third year. So the hierarchy does sort of disappear, doesn't it, Yvonne? It's not quite as perhaps important.
Yeah, people don't necessarily study in specific order. Some programs require us to, but I'm thinking like in a Bachelor of Arts, for example, you might take some science subjects, but you might take some art subjects, and then you might have some electives. So then you mix with people from different programs,
Yes.
and because they're electives, you might see them for a semester. I was thinking
Yes.
about that when you talked about shoots. I remembered at
Yeah.
uni for myself in the undergrad, I have semester friends. I call them
Yeah.
semester friends because
Yeah,
I'd see
nice.
them for a semester,
Yep.
and then we might not share the same shoots or lectures again because of timetable changes or
Yep.
clashes,
Yep.
and we may never cross paths either. And I did an arts degree where I think meeting different people from across a different discipline, and so they were just really semester friends. So if I've got some good connections, maybe we stayed in touch, but there were also other times where we couldn't, and things happen, life takes over,
Yeah.
and so we don't end up staying in touch from those shoots, even though you might have done some really good group work with them, those sorts of things
Yeah.
as well. So there's definitely no pecking order. And I was
No.
also thinking about what you're saying earlier with, like you said, that hierarchy for students or school leavers, for example. There's this stepping into this big wide world where there's a degree of anonymity in a lecture. You can sit anywhere, you can sit at the
Yep.
front, you can sit at the back, you can leave halfway. No one really checks in on that. No one really scrutinizes that.
No.
But also, like a mature age students, there is no pecking order either, and that
No.
you might be starting fresh just like everyone else, just like a school leaver. And even though you might be someone returning to study and you might have had a senior roles or something like that, but you are also essentially returning to study. And so there's this delineation around hierarchy or knowledge or skills, and everyone's in that same boat. So
Very
it feels,
true.
yeah, so it feels very, like you said, this starting over and what that might do to our identity too, which I'm sure we'll cover later.
Yeah. No, all good points. And the other thing that I was just thinking, just on the logistical sort of practical side of things, is one of the challenges can be finding your way around, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because particularly RMIT, the city campus in particular, like Bundoora and
Yeah.
Brunswick campus, are a little bit more of a sort of contained space where all the buildings are in one location. And once you're inside, you can sort of move around and find the right building. But the city campus is a CBD campus. It does have a main nucleus, if you like, around Bowen Street, but then there's buildings sort of scattered everywhere just in the CBD. So finding your way around could actually be a bit of a challenge at first. You might have buildings that are blocks away from each other, although I'm sure they probably try to schedule things to keep them in an area. But yes, that's the other thing I think, just logistically, is finding your way around could be a little bit tricky at first.
It isn't unheard of though, right? You were talking
Yeah.
about having to make time to make sure you go to your tutorials or lectures in time, but it isn't unusual that you might have one class to the next that can be 10 minutes away. I've had that happen in my undergraduate, and we were all the one campus, but you're going from one end of the campus to the other end. Yeah, and it was crazy, but you had to try to make sure you get there on time just to get a seat as well. Sometimes if we talked about lecture theatres being full, it's because they're so popular. We do know that can change, but initially it's about trying to also get on top of and make sure you do enjoy those programs and or subjects that you've selected as well.
Absolutely. And actually you mentioned, Yvonne, too, in terms of attending in person, and it might be very full at first, but you might find that as the semester goes on that people don't attend as many classes in person, and there usually is an option. Lectures, at least, I think, are generally recorded. And is Lectopia still the program that they
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's still correct. The IT changes from year to year, but there's certainly lectures do get recorded. But I would say, wouldn't you, Yvonne, that in the beginning it's really important to go in face to face?
Yeah, definitely. That too. And also, I'd imagine it's a good idea to get a feel for what university is like, classes are like, the lectures are like, the content's like. You get a sense of, whether these are suitable for you. In a previous episode, we talk about census date, which is about trying to select or drop courses or drop subjects. It's a way to know, like, if you go to these classes, then it's a way for you to understand the content, whether it is the right one for you or the right time to study this, particularly if you've got electives. If you've got a choice of electives, why not try it out? That's the trial period.
Exactly. That's a very good tip, I think. Yeah. We started to talk about maybe some of the challenges of uni. And look, there are
True.
challenges, but what do you reckon's good about being at uni, Yvonne?
Well, there's obviously you and I have been to uni
We have.
because we've had to do that for our
Yeah.
profession. So
Yes.
I'm guessing, you and I both chose to go to uni. For me, it was a choice,
Yeah.
and I may be biased in thinking there's lots of good things coming out of uni or being at uni and studying at university.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe even just higher education in general, there's a lot of
Yeah.
good things. Bear in mind, listeners, that maybe I am being biased about all of this. To me, it was also a very identity forming part of life.
So true.
And on the other hand, if I think about the academic side of things, there's a lot of growth going from high school study to university study because it fostered that kind of independence. It fostered a lot of like critical thinking as well. It made me work a little bit differently compared to high school. It really challenged me that way. And look, exams, assignments are never fun, but I actually have to say, like, we did gain skills out of that. These are skills I can develop from that, and it helped me thereon. But and then the uni life itself, I remembered sort of feeling like, oh, this wonderment about and this curiosity about the big world. It's like a big school, but it's also not. And it's like stepping into, literally for me as a school leaver, it was adult life.
Yes.
And so part of that, it comes with that sense of autonomy or independence.
Yes.
So you have a bit of freedom as to, you can try to structure your timetable how you want it within, I guess, some of the terms and condition or some of the confines of timetabling. But overall, it was like, okay, how do I make this work? How do I fit in my part-time work on top of that? Also, the actual campus life. I got to see what campus life felt like, what it was about. Sometimes I also think about how TV or media or movies portray uni life and campus life. And there was that wondering about, is this what it would be like when I go to campus, when I'm on campus? So there's that general buzz and the general sort of feeling, atmosphere of having everyone at the university almost feels sort of, in a way, it was a little bit glamorous getting into this. But certainly like that sense of, in a way, freedom and feeling like, I can get up to different things and learn skills.
It's my choice.
There were like activities on campus that you can take up that you couldn't before. So it could be like movie clubs, or I was thinking also like certain fitness classes, but also there were like sports stadiums we had, the pools we had that was on campus, or the sporting facilities we could access. It was all on a one space. So that felt really like just a sense of like I could go from doing some sporting activities, like we had squash courts, to even things like, I think we had like dancing classes, to then movie clubs or anime clubs. So we kind of catered for a bit of everyone. And that was really lovely. Like, I get to choose some of these activities and to be a part of that community, and then to kind of find my way of, in a way, trying to belong and trying to help me adapt to that, just to find the like-minded people. And I know that it was going to be different age groups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember being very excited that there was a chocolate club when I got to uni.
Oh, no way.
I joined that immediately. I don't think we did very much, but we did eat some chocolate, so that's always a good thing. And I think also that the student union, or RUSU as they're called here, RMIT Union, are great at running events that there's often free food. I'm from the Bundoora campus. On a Wednesday, RUSU will often run an event where there'll be sort of free food, or there might be a band playing, or there might be some sort of, there is a buzz, isn't there, to being
like
on
a little
campus.
Community. But you're so right. You had me at free food, as in when I was a student. I can relate. It was like, free food, activity, music, great, I'm there.
Exactly.
Or like the campus, we had campus cafeteria. So sometimes they also had discounted food. A little bit different to RMIT in that on campus where I was at, we had two types of cafeteria, and there was then after hours there was the beer hall, so
Yes.
there was discounted alcohol, and back in the
Yes.
days it was obviously like very popular. Then you
Yeah.
do trivia night, and we had different faculties would put on different shows, and we call them reviews, and they would just be a parody of the different movies that was on at the time, and they were at discounted rates. And again, it was that sense of community and entertainment, and you get to like meet people that way. So that was really nice going to uni. And I think being on campus, that's the feeling that you get from being at university.
Yes, absolutely.
And I wanted to mention as well, hopefully majority of people who are listening and majority of people who have selected uni also got into their first choice. And that's a good feeling, isn't it? When we feel like, oh yeah, I chose to be at RMIT and I got into something like, for example, architecture and or fine arts. It's like, that's a really good feeling. It's so validating, because then that's the pathway. It's helping me to get onto the pathway I wanted to be on, and or even figure out like, is this going to be the right pathway for me? But it certainly helps in that direction. So we feel like, great, I'm choosing to study my course of choice. I got into my university of choice. I got into my program of choice. I think that's a good feeling as well. Then it feels like maybe I'm one step closer to certain goals. Some people have already thought about those career goals, and it's like a feeling of, I am one step closer to that goal.
Yep, absolutely.
We've talked about what is good about being at university, what is good about studying or further education. But I imagine there's a whole heap of stuff that comes up when we're talking about getting into uni or moving into university life. And I'm thinking specifically in the area of life admin.
Yes.
Are there things that we need to think about when it comes to things like that, particularly like, around school leavers, students moving from interstate or rural areas?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely there is. And I think that stuff people often don't think about because they're focused on, this is what I'm going to be studying and I'm really excited about that. And yes, I'm moving out of home. I'm not thinking about those aspects, but the sort of life admin, I think, is just even simple things like, is your banking set up? Do you have your cards and your account and, all of that sort of stuff set up, ready to go? How are you going to pay your rent? That sort of thing. Obviously, finding somewhere to live. For students who are moving from interstate or rural, they might be moving into student accommodation like uni lodge, for example, or they might be moving into a share house situation. And so there's just the sort of the logistics of that. It might be the first time you've ever had to take care of doing your own laundry, cooking for yourself, doing the shopping, stuff that, if you've been lucky enough to live at home with parents who are able to do that stuff for you, it's probably just happened without you noticing, just, magically.
Right.
Clean clothes reappear, and all of a sudden
those fairy godmothers in the background.
I know, exactly. All of a sudden it's like, oh my God, everything's on my wardrobe and I have nothing clean to wear. So, it's thinking about sort of things like that. And look, the student accommodations I think are great, like Uni Lodge, in that it is a community that you can be a part of. And so that can feel a little bit friendlier and more comforting, first time moving out of home. But there is sort of some communal resources that you have to share, like communal kitchens and things like that. So you have to be mindful of cleaning up after yourself or getting in at a time that isn't busy to get access to what you need. So there's a lot of that sort of life admin stuff to think about, even getting a my key. Like if you're new to Victoria, in Melbourne, you may not know what the transport system is, and my key cards, I think probably most states in Australia would have a similar sort of system where it's a transport card that you recharge and add money to top up. But you need to kind of get all that organised beforehand. So there is a bit of life admin.
Even banking, like you were talking about banking before. Even moving from different states, there are different banks within each state. And if you bank with your local bank, that's not one of those big four, for example. There's Bank of Melbourne, I think it's called. We don't have that in Sydney, and I'm originally from Sydney. Even moving from Sydney to Melbourne, there are certain banks that we didn't have. And you were talking about my key. we didn't have such a thing like My Key.
No.
And then moving from Sydney to Melbourne, you guys had zones here, like you pay a certain amount for a certain zone. Whereas in Sydney, the transport was quite separate, as in back in the days, there wasn't really like one card for the public transport system, and they were all separate. So you had to buy a bus ticket if you're catching a bus, you've had to buy a train ticket if you're catching the train. But whereas here it's all different, like there's zone 1 and then there's zone 1 and zone 2, I think it's called. And then depending on that, it's different cost.
The cost is different.
So even just trying to wrap my head around that was if I go from here to here, is that within the same zone? Is that out of the zone? And if do I need to change transportation? It was really just like, what?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then the lines, train lines.
Yes, that's right. How it all works with the maps. And although I have to say, compared to some other places in the world, I just went to Seoul last year. That's a very complicated subway system compared to our little one in Melbourne is really simple in comparison to that. But nonetheless, it's probably going to feel very complex to someone who hasn't encountered that. The city loop and where the stations, which is our subway, I guess we don't call it a subway here, but where you sort of are going to end up in which part of the city, and what's my nearest station? What tram do I catch if I'm getting a tram or a bus? What bus number is it? Where does it depart from? What's the timetable? All of that sort of stuff. And look, I think the My Key system has made some things easier, like you mentioned about the zone 1 and 2. You don't have to worry about that anymore, and that you just tap your card when you complete your journey, and it calculates it. Calculates it. So you don't have to worry about, am I paying for zone 1 or zone 1 and 2? But it's all of that sort of stuff that you probably just haven't thought about. That's just worth getting your head around a little bit before you start, so that it isn't so overwhelming. There isn't too much new all at once. Yeah.
There's that habits as well. I was thinking about even just being able to get into certain habits and having to get used to, for example, if you catch public transport, and getting used to catching public transport here, getting into the habit of, if you catch a tram, knowing that you also have to factor in certain leeway with time and or delay. I know with trams here, because they use the roads shared with cars, traffic can be impacted by the actual cars and the amount of cars on the road these days. Having to factor that in, that it's not as straightforward sometimes compared to catching the train. Might run a little bit on time because they don't necessarily share roads, and similar with buses as well. So it's just building those habits so that it becomes a little bit more normed, or a little bit more everyday life for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one thing I didn't think of is driving. So if you are coming particularly to Brunswick or Bundoora, for example, there is a car park and it's reasonably priced. So many people may choose to come in their car just because that they don't have to worry about timetables, and they can leave home when they're ready and plan it around that. But nonetheless, you still have to think about traffic conditions and how long things take, and make sure you do organise the parking, which you can get a yearly pass, which is all sort of done online. So think about transport, and I was thinking before in terms of other life admin, like just the practical stuff around eating and shopping and laundry and stuff. Routine is good, isn't it, Yvonne? I would say, like, I think maybe say today, this day, Mondays, Sundays, whatever, is my laundry day, and that's when I do my laundry, and this is when I do my shopping. And because I think it just contains you a little bit, rather than being a bit ad hoc about it, or waiting until everything's on the floor drobe and going, I need to do some washing. It'll probably contain you a little bit and just sort of reduce a bit of stress if you set up some routines around that stuff. Get some recipes from home, some favourite family recipes. Talk to your parents. How do you make this, mum and dad? And, what are the ingredients that I need? And, because I'd like to be able to make this one for myself. This is a favourite of mine. Things like that, that's just worth doing, so that you've got, some stuff ready to go.
Yeah, so true. There's stuff around like meal planning. There's stuff around, maybe it's worthwhile bringing some of your items that you have from home, so there is a sense of home or a link to home. I remember talking to some clients about, if you've missed your family, maybe there's some things that you want to bring that belong to them with you, so that it feels like, you've got a piece of home with you. And this goes for obviously international students, but certainly any students moving interstate as well.
Yeah.
Especially if you've lived at home all your life, you want to
Yeah.
have a sense of home or a reminder, some kind of a metaphor, I suppose, of a
Yes.
reminder for home.
Yes,
And,
that's a lovely idea.
I remember one session we talked about smells. You
Yeah.
go home and your home smells a particular way because you've lived there all your life, your family
Yes.
smells. And so sometimes we even miss, we
Yes.
miss my mum's smell, or
Yes.
how her clothes or her hair smells, like things like
Yes.
that. So it's
Yes.
like even just having some of those objects with us so that it feels like home if we get homesick, or a sense
That's
of
a lovely idea.
wanting to kind of fit in or belong here, but still
Yeah.
having connection to home.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something still to bear in mind, homesickness, right? Because many students will be able to continue to stay where they are and won't have to make that change, but there will be some that do have to make that change. And, even if you're just coming from, I don't know, Geelong or Bendigo or Ballarat or something like that, which isn't that far from Melbourne, you could potentially go home every weekend sort of thing. But nonetheless, during the week, you are going to be here in Melbourne and you may feel homesick. You may miss those sights and sounds and smells and things and just the routine and structure and the containment of home. And so I love that idea of having some sort of bridging objects that you can just take with you that create that connection to home. And smell is an incredibly powerful one. So it's not silly to maybe pinch mum's perfume and spray it on a few things and have them around you, or dad's aftershave or whatever, or, or the brothers or sisters' smelly shoes. No, probably not that one. You'll probably be happy to get rid of that. Also, maybe check with your family first before you remove things. You don't want to take your whole kitchen set from the kitchen and then have your folks say, what are we supposed to use now? So obviously in negotiation. But yeah, I really like the idea of bridging objects that you can just take with you that give you that connection to home. And don't feel like if you're feeling homesick, that means you're not good or strong or resilient. It's natural to feel homesick. Everyone does, I think.
Don't we? We all have degrees of that, especially if you've never been to Melbourne before or lived away from family before.
Yes.
Some people come here because they have been used to it if they've been to boarding school, for example. But not everyone's gone to boarding school.
No, exactly. Exactly right. Yeah.
And they have to live with now new housemates. And you can't yell at them because they're not your siblings.
Exactly right.
You can't leave things around because they're not your parents who are going to pick up after you.
That's
but
right.
You will have to learn how to adult in some ways.
Yes, absolutely.
What an adjustment.
Yeah, it is an adjustment. It is. They almost need classes on that, don't they? Adulting 101.
Yeah. Well, didn't there used to be classes around things like behaving in a, what's the word, ladylike way? We're talking about back etiquette. Is it the 50s, 60s? Etiquette classes.
Yes, that's right.
But it is one of those that we don't get taught, and it just seems expected that we will step into this.
That somehow we'll just know. We'll just naturally, organically know. But like, how do you know?
That's right.
Until you experience something and you work it out. So
that's right. And then things come up and you go, oh, I didn't realize about this. Oh, didn't realize about that.
You were talking about
even driving. Driving with driver's license. Oh, you have to change. Oh, but how long a grace period do you have before you actually have to change if you intend on living in Melbourne?
Correct.
And if you want to drive. And then there's different road rules if you want to drive here.
Yes.
And then there's also making sure you don't run into the trams, and there are tram rules when you're driving.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. I imagine that was an adjustment for you, Yvonne, coming from Sydney.
Yeah, the hook turns.
The hook turns.
Like,
I was going to say. Yeah.
Makes no sense. But
I know.
Okay.
I know. I was telling my son's just learning to drive at the moment. And I was saying, we'll have to take you into the city. It's only in the CBD that these hook turns. There's not out once you get outside the CBD. But I said, I'm going to have to show you hook turns. And he's like, what is that? That is ridiculous. That's so confusing. It's like, yeah, it is. It's it's logical in its own way in that anyway, we won't get into road rules. But yeah, it is definitely a Melbourne thing, a hook turn that you need to sort of, I don't know that there's any other city in the world that has that road rule. So that's a tricky one.
Curious to know. Yeah. But certainly many facets of life that you've got to adjust to. And we touched on a bit about stress in terms of this adjustment, didn't we? I think we talked a little bit about that homesickness.
Yes.
And how that can also be part of adjusting, can be stressful.
Absolutely, yeah. So would you say, Yvonne, then that going to uni, adjusting to uni is inherently stressful?
As a part of life, we
Yes.
can expect some stress, can't we?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that in the International Students podcast episode,
Yes.
that it is natural and it would be common to experience stress because there is change or
Yes.
change is stressful.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, like even unexpected or expected change brings about a level of stress because it's the human condition is when we have something that is different and it's all novel and it can be challenging, it can be stressful to us. And so we have to really learn to adjust to that and learn how to have strategies to manage that. What comes to mind as well is whilst it is all exciting and it can be challenging and those challenges come with stress, like you said earlier, having a balance, having a routine, making sure that you are looking after yourself, having to prioritize that becomes important when we're trying to make some adjustments, settling into uni, settling into life at uni. And maybe it's a good idea to try and do that before uni starts or class starts. So you kind of get an idea and get your head around what that will be like. And so you've taken care of maybe the life admin part before your classes have started. So then you've got some room later on to adjust to those classes and or lectures and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like being prepared, isn't it? You know, like be a good Boy Scout or Girl Scout or whatever, and be prepared. It will help reduce the stress if you are anticipating what things might cause you some challenge and taking some steps to work out how you're going to manage that. The old classic study work-life balance often, isn't it? Because many uni students will need to be working to support themselves. And so, you know, you've got to fit those three things together and don't leave out the life part because that is important. But have a listen to our episode on time management for some tips around organising your time because that's also something to factor in. Yeah. The other thing that popped into my head was that I remember when I first started working in a university counselling service, one of the things that really struck me as something that students would often come to seek support with is that they would fall into a bit of a trap of thinking, because nobody monitors you here at uni, right? Like there's no role. Occasionally classes have an attendance requirement, but mostly not. So you're walking into a lecture theatre that has 500 people in it. Who would know whether you're there or not? So it's very easy to just get a bit drunk on the freedom, if you like, not go to any classes, and there's no immediate consequences. There's no detention. There's no teacher breathing down your neck. You can keep it all very separate from your parents. They won't be getting, my son's in year 12 this year, and we get notifications, the parents do, by email saying, this is what your son's up to. This is the homework that he's doing, you know. So I'm like, I can keep a close eye on what's happening. That won't happen at uni, which you might be thinking, woohoo, you know, that's fantastic. But the downside of it is that sometimes people fall into the trap of just enjoying the freedom and then the consequences hit much further down the line, but the consequences can be a little bit more severe, not to scare you, but can be a little bit more severe than just a detention, in that if you fail courses repeatedly, you know, you can even get kicked out of the program. So it isn't just a come along and party and have fun and if you fail, you fail, it's no big deal. Like it does come to an end at some point. Sometimes students would just get into a hole because there isn't that monitoring anymore. There isn't that reminder, hey, that thing's due. Hey, have you done that? Have you started that? Let's spend some class time working on that. It's all left up to you. It's like, as you said before, Yvonne, you are treated as an adult and you are expected to function as an adult functions, which is to take responsibility for deadlines and planning and all of that sort of stuff, it can be a big adjustment. Some students might have come from schools where there's a lot of monitoring and scrutiny and checking in, you know, so others maybe from schools where there was a bit less of that, but everyone's now going to be in the same position where there won't be that scrutiny anymore.
That's right. And it reminds me of the idea that with that freedom and or independence, how true that is when they say it comes with responsibilities.
Correct.
And how you were saying there's no monitoring, the pressure from that is eased right off. But how much of that then becomes your self-responsibility really highlighted to me that, gosh, we really have such a strong sense of self-responsibility. No one's there to monitor our attendance. No one's there to monitor whether you hand in an assignment or not, or how you're going throughout your study with that subject or the whole program.
That's right.
And yet it can get to examination and or assessment time, and whether you hand in the work or not, no one's going to monitor that either until they grade it and they give you really a grade. And then you have to, if you aren't keeping up, that becomes very evident then.
Yes.
And it might be too late to kind of salvage it by then. And you have to really work out how you're going to, whether it explain yourself, salvage it, how are you going to like continue if you've really fallen behind. So don't want to alarm people, but it does come with those consequences that occur much later. So you do have to be on top of it now.
You do. And look, I feel like, and I won't go into this because it's a whole other side topic, but there is new legislation, Commonwealth legislation, so it's an Australia-wide thing that requires students on Commonwealth supported places who are, you know, perhaps getting HECS or fee help to pay for their courses, that if they don't progress at a reasonable rate through their program, in that they're failing a certain percentage, more than 50% of their courses, you know, within a year, you might find yourself excluded from the program, you know, or have lost that funding, lost that Commonwealth supported place. So the consequences, unfortunately, again, not to scare our listeners, but the consequences.
But that is a reality, isn't it?
It is.
Part
It's
of
the
that
reality.
And part of the condition of accepting the study, just to bear in mind, because it is something that as a student, I imagine the responsibility is to yourself, but there is the financial aspect to it, but also like your study can be impacted, which can also impact your goals, your career goals down the track.
Yes.
One of my clients was talking about it derailed their career goal when they now had to repeat the whole semester because they weren't doing too well, and they kind of let the partying get out of hand, for example. So that was a bit of a wake-up call, but it got quite far into the semester, and in fact past the assessment semester, to realize, actually, I can't salvage this anymore. I've got to write off this semester, and it was time wasted, but also cost-wise in terms of debt or financial loans. And that's now added to his financial debt and having to repeat the semester when there's a feeling of other people graduating, you know, and he won't be at the same time as his friends or peers.
Yep, absolutely.
So it is part of a reality, unfortunately, and just something to be realistic about.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to know that stuff ahead of time so that you are impressing upon yourself the importance of fulfilling those responsibilities, those adulting responsibilities around monitoring your time and making sure you're handing things in, or if you're struggling, get help early.
That's right. Yeah, very true.
There's plenty of resources around. Yeah.
As you talk about the adulting, I was actually thinking about how that also contributes to going to university. It sounds like we're starting a different journey and or chapter in life, particularly for school leavers, even for mature age students returning to study, you know, what that must do to a person's sense of identity. What do you reckon?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key point, Yvonne, and I'm glad you raised it because I think it is such an identity-forming time of your life. You are usually choosing something vocational or that will lead you in a vocational direction, in that's contributing toward what you would do for a career. And, you know, that can be a bit scary because we sometimes think, oh, my God, this is it. If I don't choose the right thing, I can never change it. But in actual fact, people change courses all the time, and it's actually completely normal to start something and go, not right for me, and switch to something else. But you will start to think about who I am, you know, who am I? Like, you know, what are my strengths? Maybe what are my things that are not so strong? What values do I have? You'll be thinking a lot about all of that sort of stuff. And I certainly know, even like say for us in our career as psychologists, we have to be very mindful of how we publicly present to the world, right? Because we're caring for others' welfare, and you know, we're not going to be posting on Facebook pictures of drunken debauchery and things like that, you know what I mean? Or like we have to be mindful of our privacy, obviously, because there's importance of boundaries and things. But look, I think in any profession that you're going to go into that's relevant, social media and your presence on social media, and I'm segueing into a whole other topic here, but this is all stuff around sort of identity formation, you know, knowing who you are. So that's one of the exciting things, I think, is getting to know who you are at uni. Like if it's a good fit for you, then it's exciting. It's like, oh, it's all coming together. It's all falling into place for me. If it's not a good fit, then there's some angst around, oh, I thought it was going to be this, but maybe it needs to be something else. You know, I'll need to maybe get some help, talk to someone about what my options are. But it's absolutely a time of getting to know yourself yourself. And we've already touched on the need to be more responsible and handle things yourself that you know, maybe used to get done for you. You are being treated as an adult for the first time. If you're coming from school, I mean high school, if you are a mature age student returning to study, then that's a massive identity shift, right? I certainly remember when I had kids and I had to be a mum for the first time. I was like, I don't know how to do this. Like, no one teaches you that either. No. It's like it's such a big shift in identity because each role that you have comes with certain things come with it, right? And so there's that grief, maybe for me, I know when I left work for a while to become a mum, it was like, oh, I'm not a psychologist now. I'm just, I mean, of course, I'm always a psychologist, but like I wasn't working as a psychologist because I was on maternity leave. Who the hell am I if I'm not that? And, you know, I think for mature age students that may have been very successfully working in a profession and they're maybe doing a career change and they're kind of having to go back to the beginning, right? You know, I'm a newbie again. And I'm reassessing my sense of identity and I'm having to incorporate this student identity back into my life again. Maybe it hasn't been part of my life for a really long time and now it is again. I can recall some mature age students that I've worked with previously who really even struggled with IT a little bit. Just like everything's done online now. It's submissions of assessments and things like that are done online and materials are accessed online. And look, I think most people are pretty IT savvy these days, but maybe, you know, you've relied on your children to work that stuff out for you or something, or just not had to. You've been able to avoid it a little bit, but suddenly you'll be at uni and you're going to have to work that stuff out.
Or we get familiar with certain IT software. Let's say we do certain ones at work, but then I'm thinking when I went through uni, we had Blackboard and now it's Canvas.
Yes.
And then it's Collaborate Ultra and I'm trying to keep up with all these labels and names. Now. It's like, what are all these and how are they different and why are they all different? Why are they all changing?
Absolutely.
So there is still, like, even if you are comfortable with technology, we can also get quite comfortable with technology. And so when we have to learn a new system, it is relearning or learning.
It is. Yeah. And you may feel a bit like a fish out of water for a little while.
Yes, very much so. I think the identity as well, like you said, with mature age students becoming that newbie and changes a different way we see. I'm thinking about even confidence. Like it makes us sometimes question our confidence at being able to do certain things well. Maybe I was really competent at my previous job and then I'm going for a career change and going to study something completely different. They open up new challenges and then that probably challenges my own confidence as well in terms of being able to do certain things, or going back to essay writing, for example, and I haven't had to do that in a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are certain challenges for mature age students, aren't there, Yvonne, like things that maybe students who have been at high school and have been used to like writing essays and doing exams and all that sort of stuff. It's maybe not going to be such a big leap to jump into the university assessment system because there'll be things that are familiar to them, like assignments, essays and exams, you know, as forms of assessment. But yeah, as a mature age student, maybe you haven't done any of those things for a really long time.
I remember thinking I was a mature age student doing a master's program and working and then suddenly, like you said, not working. So I went from, you know, working full time to then actually quitting my job to focus on study just to adjust. That was the idea. And that would have taken a financial hit as well because going from supporting myself to actually spending all my savings. I can see the savings dwindle
very balance
quickly.
Go down and down and down. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's frightening, isn't it? Yeah.
And having to budget and plan and making sure to do all of that beforehand. So it's all part of it too. And then on top of that, it was getting to know the cohort or my classmates and getting back into sitting in class again versus I used to have appointment for clients and meetings and they're just, you know, short ones like an hour or so. Each time it's an hour or so. Whereas with uni, again, it was 3-hour lectures and you're sitting in the 3-hour lecture and then part of that might be a tutorial at the end with a group of people, do some group discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of things that might be new. And I was thinking too, it must have been a lot more juggling that you had to do as a mature age student, perhaps, just because of oftentimes this may not have have been the case with you, but there might be some mature age students who are returning to study that have families, they have kids.
That's right.
And those things that have to sort of be juggled as well, pickups and drop-offs and childcare and all of that sort of stuff that has to be navigated, can sort of add to the challenge and the stress a little bit.
Yeah, we know, speaking from students who are mature age students and who are parents, the stress of having to do some assignments, but also looking after perhaps kids under primary school age.
That's
I
right.
remember I had a client like that in previous times, and she had to find time to do the work when they've put the baby down.
Yes, that's right.
Or they've had to get some help during the day, maybe through their own parents, while they actually sit through and do like an online lecture and then also do an assessment. So having to plan or make sure there is childcare or babysitting around all of those little things, and then managing that part-time. I imagine also that kind of schedule is quite different compared to if you were engaging in full-time study.
That's
and
true.
Your focus was purely for the study and academic side of things.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you might end up in a class where the majority of the students are considerably younger than you, and that can be a bit isolating as well.
Yeah, I know. We know students that have talked about that as well, that there is a bit of divide or feeling like they don't necessarily quite fit in when they look around them. And even students who are studying at master's level and who are mature age students, we know that there can be quite a big age gap, because there are students who've gone from a high school to their undergraduate and then into a master's program. But then we've also got students who have a working career and then, like you said, have returned to study and embarking on a different career or a new career, and they are starting fresh. So there's a massive age difference as well, of variety within a cohort.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that comes with some social challenges, I imagine.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what would you say some of the social challenges are, Yvonne? Because that's actually a topic that I think is worth considering. We've sort of talked about the academic side of things, but what about the social side of things? What do you see as being some of the challenges?
Yeah, and even as we were talking about the sense of identity earlier, I was thinking about, as a school leaver, first of all, you're meeting people from all walks of life, and you're meeting people who maybe different cultural background, socioeconomic status as well, background, and also career background. So like there's such a melting pot, like literally a melting pot of different people and or backgrounds that we get to meet, which is great, right? Like, so on one hand, if you're open to those experiences and if you're quite a social person, it's great. But then if you aren't, if you're quite comfortable with, your own core group of friends, again, I'm thinking from a school leaver perspective, it's like, I feel like I know who I am because my sense of who myself and who I am from my core group of friends, I've got a bit of a good idea. And then being exposed though to all sorts of people from all walks of life, it may feel a little bit confused, I imagine, like you could feel a little bit lost or a little bit displaced. And if your core group of friends don't go to the same university, then you have to start all over again. You have to make new connections. You have to know if you vibe with certain people. You have to be open to vibing with new people because there is such a melting pot. And if you're coming from a regional area or rural area, there may not be those people with the same upbringing or values or morals or thinking. They're not like-minded people, and so you might need to be open to that as well. And that can be challenging because it might make you wonder about, can you be open to those experiences or people or thinking or values or background or culture? Lots of things to consider out of that.
Yeah, there'll be so much to take in, so many things to sort of work out about yourself. And I was
thinking also, like confusion at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, all good. All I was going to say is I think it might sound like a funny thing to say, but you sort of have to work out how to make friends as well. And I know that, most people will go, oh, gosh, if you don't know how to make friends by the time you get to uni, like, what's wrong with you, sort of thing. But in reality, it's like another one of those things that's like no one actually teaches you what's the process of making friends, right? Like, how do I do it? I'll always remember an old client of mine who talked about going into a class and like, well, what do you do? Like, where do you sit? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I do, because I'm someone that's comfortable in a social setting, is that I will walk in, I'll sit sit next to someone I don't know and I'll say, can I sit here? And then, hi, my name's Liz. What's your name? And we'll get a conversation started. And I always remember this client looking at me horrified, going, oh my God, can you do that? Like, what will people think of you if you just walk up to a complete stranger? Because, many of us are used to like that poker face that you wear on the train or in a lift, like where you don't know eye contact and I'm in my own bubble and you're in your bubble and we don't connect with each other. It's like to deliberately break the bubble and enter into each other's world is like, there's a process, right? And then how do you move from we've just had a nice chat in this lecture and we get along and we're vibing with each other? What next? Is it weird if I ask for your phone number? Like, do I,
or
do
is
I
it too soon? Or
is it too soon? Like, what's
Yeah.
the timing and like what's appropriate? And so actually, it is a process that you maybe have to engage in for the first time really in a long time, that it's sort of new. Whereas I think for students who've just gone from primary school to high school, it's a bit more organic. They've gone with their cohort of friends and they stay together as a group and it's sort of easy. It just happened. It's not always easy, of course. Some people do have challenges early on as well. But I think,
it happens organically.
It happens organically maybe, whereas, uni, you're going to have to make active efforts. To make friends and maybe just think about like what is the timing of things and when should I say, hey, would it be okay if we changed numbers, and hey, do you want to get a coffee after class or a chai or whatever, and or hey, I'm thinking of going to see this movie, would you like to come, sort of thing. And then of course there's romantic relationships as well that come into it. That's also another thing around how do you treat friends versus someone you might be romantically interested in. And it's a minefield.
But I also want to acknowledge you were saying before that we do tend to, and I think this may be I was thinking whether it's a city thing, like if you grew up living in the suburbs and or a city or metropolitan city, we do tend to do things like keep a bit of a poker face. We learn to do that socially on public transport. But I imagine for students coming from rural areas or regional areas, they're very also used to like, people in your town,
and everyone knows who your name is.
That's right. You all know each other. You grew up relatively close to each other, so you're familiar with them. You might be used to saying hi to people on the street. That's so norm. But in the city, no one acknowledges you, and that can be really challenging. It can feel like, oh, everyone's so unfriendly, but that's probably not the case. Everyone's really in their own world.
Yeah, that's right.
And minding their own business, and that can happen at university as well.
Definitely. And I think if you challenge yourself to break that bubble, that social bubble, that people are responsive. Sometimes I just experiment with this. I walk around and I deliberately make eye contact with people and I deliberately say hi. And I have to say 99% of the time people go, oh, hi. They actually do. Or they'll have a conversation like, oh, hot today, isn't it? Or whatever. Like you'll just have a moment of connection. But if you don't seek it, if you kind of keep yourself in your bubble, then people don't generally seek it either. You have to make some active efforts to break those bubbles a little bit. People are responsive in my experience, but it's a conscious thing that you have to decide to do.
Yeah, and it does take a bit of an effort, or like you said, you need to initiate that, and it's okay to initiate that. It's not. It can be a little bit scary, but it's also good to kind of test those waters out and challenge ourselves, and that's a part of getting to know ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And look back to the client that I was mentioning before that was horrified about that idea of walking up to a stranger and saying, hi, can I sit here? She actually did that. And she came back and said to me, oh, it was great. I sat next to someone who I really got along with and we chatted the whole time and we're going to catch up afterwards. And it was like that wouldn't have happened if I'd done what I usually do, which is just to slink in up the back and find the most unobtrusive place to sit and stay in my bubble and not talk to anyone. So these are things to think about maybe and push yourself a little bit if you're the sort of person that's maybe naturally inclined to hold back a little bit.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the person who probably had that greeting, who your client greeted. Gosh, what an opening for them to probably start a conversation too.
Absolutely.
I was thinking
reassuring.
That's right. Generally speaking, people in class are probably waiting for someone to initiate a conversation.
Absolutely.
Some people are more extroverted and can do that much more naturally. But I think also generally when you're sitting in a class, someone's waiting for you to say hi. Someone is waiting for you to make the first greeting or initiate, just to break the ice and help make things feel a little bit comfortable. So you're not alone, and it's pretty normal that everyone's sort of been keeping to themselves but being open to having those conversations as well. So it's kind of like trying to make sure you just getting out there and putting yourself out there a little bit. Don't be shy, be a little bit active.
That's right. And if you need some support in, and encouragement in being able to do those things, just do remember that we have our counselling service here and we can assist you with things like that. Like, don't feel silly if you go, oh, I'm having trouble making friends. Oh my God, that's an embarrassing thing to go and talk to a counsellor about. Trust me, it's not. And we've had many students over the years that have come to us about feeling isolated and disconnected and wanting some help with that. So come and talk about it, I'd say.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that sense of belonging, it takes some time to kind of settle in. So be patient with yourself about that too. And certainly a topic that comes up during counselling sessions.
Exactly. So I think that puts me in mind of some solutions maybe. Like, we've talked a lot about the challenges and some. We've also talked about the excitements. But I know, Yvonne, you've got your fingers on a few really good resources that you might like to suggest to students that can help the adjustment. So I'll hand over to you to maybe explain what some of those are.
I was thinking, we've probably throughout our conversation today have covered some of them, right?
But true.
Also, I know that talking with Pierre in the previous episode about adjustment, she's probably covered some actual practical resources. Look, it may sound a little bit repetitive, but I guess one of the things I often think about in talking with students, even prior to classes starting, is about actually getting yourself prepared with uni life, but getting yourself prepared with where you're at. And when I was thinking about this episode and this conversation, I was actually thinking about with international students, especially these days with social media, there's a lot of walking tours that people film, they upload on YouTube.
Yes.
If you are coming into Melbourne for the first time, you've never been and you've never really come here to scope out or holiday, just have a look at those walking tours. They'll take you through a city. And then when you come here, you'll be like, oh, so this was there and this was there. And so it gives you a sense of like just to familiarize yourself with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you start to feel like at least you're not seeing it for the very first time. I imagine most people these days probably would have holidayed or visited Melbourne, and so it's easy to get your head around it if you're in the city campus. But I'm sure also RMIT would have videos, and probably on YouTube as well, of different campuses. They would have showed you different campuses or given you quite a quick tour of the different campuses like Brunswick or Bundoora. So just kind of check it out if you can, just so you know what it looks like. The other thing, part of that, I suppose, settling into living in Melbourne would be there'll be local tours around. We know, like when you visit a foreign city, sometimes they do like free walking tours. You learn a bit about the history of those cities. Do that if you can, even if you are Australian, do that for Melbourne, just so it's something you can do with friends or family who visit as well.
Nice.
One of the big things would be if you are a school leaver, whether you're international and or coming from regional area, maybe come with your family or have a family member come so that it helps you settle in, whether it's in the first week or two. If that's a healthy family dynamic, for sure. Like I wouldn't say that if it's not. Have a parent come with you so that the things about life admin becomes a little bit easier to manage as you settle in. And do that a week or two before uni starts, because otherwise everything's going to happen at once with classes starting, and you don't want that. That's just overwhelming, and you
might be flooded then.
That's right, and you're stressing yourself out unnecessarily. So if you can help it, try and get here beforehand and make sure like you've got your accommodation sorted, all that sort of stuff. And again, if you have a family member come, there are things they can tell you, or there are things they may notice. There are things that you might not notice, and then there are things that they can help you in terms of having a routine or structure, and maybe they can give advice about that. Even little things like going to the bank, even little things like changing your driver's license or sussing that out, or driving and needing to go to multiple trips to IKEA, for example. You've got someone who can carry stuff for you or with you. If you don't have family members who do that, maybe even housemates, even like your roommates if you're sharing in a studio or a student accommodation, little things like that. Pierre in our previous episode talked about a lot of RMIT related activities, things like the orientation, career. There's also how to RMIT. The other one would be certainly those RUSU activities and or RUSU events. And then outside of that, those meetup groups, meetup.com's probably started up again now that things are probably back in person. And those are good ways to also meet other people in the community. I did want to say also like chaplaincy. We have a multi-faith chaplaincy, and I know that it's very helpful to have students get in contact with the chaplains there, just so that, again, it's a sense of community and connecting with people. And if you're of a particular faith, it's really helpful that way. And whether you do do follow that faith or not, but culturally even sometimes people feel really comforted just being able to settle into and knowing there's a chaplain there or an elder there that they can talk with.
Absolutely.
And then they can get you in touch with other people.
Yeah, even things like prayer rooms for those who need that sort of space on campus, like finding out where that is and linking with chaplaincy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a previous conversation with another colleague, we were talking about even just knowing your GP, for example, because if you're moving here and you know, we all are going to encounter health problems or, you know, going to get sick at some point. And for international students, some students come from a country where if you're sick, you go to the hospital. Here you go to a medical center. Here you go see a family physician or a general practitioner. So it's little things like that to make sure that you get linked in. And RMIT, the city campus, has now the medical hub downstairs from the student services. So it's really easy to set up your details with them or register with them. So at least you know it's a go-to if you're sick and you're not taking yourself to the hospital and or waiting in emergency for like 8 hours because you're not a priority.
Correct.
And it's those little things to know as well, and knowing where your local GP might be or transferring your medical files if you need to, particularly if you're on medication.
Yep. Absolutely. That's very important. Yeah.
I'm sure there's probably a lot more as well that we haven't covered though.
Well, I was thinking a couple of RMIT services that are good for people to know about in the sort of support space. Obviously, there's ours, you know, the counselling service, which is free and confidential short-term counselling. There's also student welfare advisors that can assist with things like difficulties around finances and housing and, you know, maybe some of the more pragmatic sort of support that they can give you. And then we've got a careers service as well, so and a job shop, so they can help with seeking employment and mock interviews and things like that. But also if you're feeling like this is not the right course for me, actually, you know, now that I've started it, I've realised it's not a good fit. That's someone you can talk to for some advice and support around how do I work out what is the right thing for me. And study and learning was the other one that I was going to say.
Library, that's
the library. Yeah. So there's an online learning lab that has sort of online tutorials around how to revise for exams, you know, how to write an essay, all of that sort of stuff that maybe if you're getting back into it as a mature age student, it'd be worth revisiting. Or even just like, how do I write a university essay or a university assignment that's worth accessing? But you can also meet with them in a group setting or one-on-one where they can actually, you can bring a piece of work to them and have them have a look at it. They won't be content experts, but they can certainly make sure that it's good academic writing, that you've structured it properly, that you've answered the question. They can maybe help you with grammar and spelling and things like that, you know, just in terms of a bit of editing, sort of looking over. So it's a bit like having a little free tutor in a way, just to sort of talk you through. Do utilise those support resources within the university too. Oh, Compass, that was the other one I was going to mention. Compass is through the Student Union, RUSU, and they can also provide drop-in support if you're having a bad day and you just need to talk things through with someone. You know, with our service, it's appointment-based, so you have to book in advance, but they can be a bit of a place where you can just drop in and have a chat if you're feeling a bit down.
Yeah, we know that service gets utilised very much so during the semester.
Yes.
Because there will be, you know, students who encounter situations, difficulties or challenges during the semester. But it is good to bear in mind that they are there.
Yeah.
And they are I think a confidential service, but it's not like an ongoing support like we offer.
So for us, it's more of a, you know, you book an appointment and you'll see us for up to 6 sessions to work on a particular problem or whatever it is that you're coming for. And people do come for all sorts of reasons. So don't ever feel like it's silly. But Compass is a bit more, I'm having a bad moment today. I need someone to talk to right now. And they won't necessarily do the ongoing sessions, but they might help refer you into our service so that you can connect with us for that little bit more of that ongoing care.
Good place to have a cup of tea kind of thing. That's how I think of it. And that's how I encourage students to head there as well. Just it's a space you can have a sit down, have a cup of tea, have a chat with someone.
That's it. And I think they have a pantry as well, don't they? So like if you've forgotten your lunch or you're a bit strapped can't afford to buy yourself lunch that day, you know, then you'll be able to go there and get some food as well. So that's
they do provide supplies in a sort of an emergency or urgent situation if you are a bit low on finance or a bit down on certain things like toiletries and food, like you said.
That's right. So, lots of good supports. Just get yourself in the know about what's out there.
Yeah. And I think Pierre had mentioned Study Melbourne, and I think that was very focused with the Study Melbourne Centre. It's like a international lens though, but certainly I imagine for rural students, it's not a bad thing to also check it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But your local council will probably also have a lot of activities to get to know the local area and or to get to know your local neighbourhood. If you have relatives who live here, you know, sometimes it's helpful to get in touch with them, even if you're not necessarily close, but it's a way to connect and at least help you settle in at the beginning.
Yeah, and another one that I just thought of, look, well, they're all coming thick and fast now, Yvonne, aren't they? Goodness.
Fantastic.
I was just thinking that you could even go onto Facebook and just put your suburb down. And so say like it's, I don't know, Frankston Community Voice or Geelong Community Voice or whatever. I'm picking really out of Melbourne suburbs. I don't know why I happened to pick those.
No,
but
that's
anyway,
okay.
Might be Northcote Community Voice. Anyway, they usually will have community groups based on the suburb. So I'm on ones for my local area and people will say things like, did anyone hear that noise? Did you hear that helicopter? Like, what was that about sort of thing? Or I've lost my dog. Can someone help me? Oh, you know, and then people will pipe in and say, oh, I saw a dog down there, you know, that looked a bit like yours. It's actually a way of creating community in your neighbourhood. In this very disconnected world that we live in many ways, we can use that online space sometimes just to connect. So, you know, you could even post, does anyone have or does anyone know of? Sometimes people go, where can I find a plumber or whatever or this tradesperson? You can find that if you join those community sites on Facebook. So once you know where you're living, jump on one of those.
Great idea. I think in our previous episode when talking to Pierre, one of the things I think my takeaway from that was what you said about just expecting also the unexpected, you know, things will come up and
that's right.
We can react to it and we can react emotionally to it, but maybe it's also preparing for the unexpected. Sometimes not everything's going to go right the first week and there'll be teething issues, there'll be some
that's right.
laundry doesn't always work type of thing, or you run out of change if you have a communal laundry, and things will work themselves out slowly, getting the right help, getting the right support, talking to also people, getting ideas about that, and just giving yourself some time.
Be gentle with yourself. Be very gentle with yourself.
That's right.
You know,
be kind.
Be kind. Don't hold unrealistic expectations that you're just going to sail through without any issues. Look, maybe you will, but in case you don't want to feel like you've failed or you're not good enough or strong enough or whatever. All of this stuff is actually completely normal, and you only add to the challenge of dealing with something if you are heaping blame on yourself and getting upset with yourself for not dealing with it better, quote unquote. So that's why we say be gentle, be very gentle with yourself.
Yeah. And I also want to add, with students coming in from interstate, for example, it's good to stay in touch with your core friends as well, no matter how busy you guys are. And it's good to kind of have that route whilst you are planting new roots here.
Yes.
So whilst that is happening, but also don't forget to stay in touch with your own community back home or your friendships back home, because they can be also very grounding for us too.
Absolutely. Yeah, don't feel like you have to cope without them. It's perfectly okay to call your friends from home regularly or go home on weekends regularly. It doesn't have to be that you have to be big and tough and tough it out. And but it's a balance, isn't it? Like you don't want to do that too much either, to the detriment of maybe not making connections here in Melbourne.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Yvonne. And thanks you,
Liz.
Listeners, for joining us today. We hope that you were able to get something helpful out of our chat about adjustment to university. And if you are about to embark on your university adventure, we hope that you feel a little more prepared after listening to this. But don't forget that if you hit any bumps on the road, there is help available, and seeking help will definitely smooth things out to get you back on track. Also, remember that although we talked a lot about challenges today, there are a lot of exciting things about starting university, and it will be such an important and formative part of your life that you'll always remember. So it's very special. We wish you happy travels and a smooth adjustment. And so until next time, goodbye from the Counselling Armchair.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try your best to make it through with love.